We're basically playing a billion year relay race.
In expressing, we are seeking to find further understanding of what exactly we're expressing.
I pretty much try to create with the belief that the song already exists. I'm just being a vessel for it. I feel like it's the closest thing that I've like personally experienced on a consistent basis with like almost like spiritual ascension.
Hello, and welcome to Truth and Tradition. In this episode, I'm speaking with musician, songwriter, and deep thinker, BAYEM. BAYEM hails from Indianapolis and has been producing music for the past few years. In this episode, he and I tackle topics about the creative process, modern spirituality, and wisdom for your daily life. If you've ever wondered where ideas and inspiration comes from, then you'll find this conversation extremely enlightening. Without further ado, here is my conversation with BAYEM. Hello, welcome to the podcast. BAYEM, correct? Is that the right pronunciation?
Yeah, it's BAYEM. It's technically BAYEM, but everyone just calls me BAYEM. It makes more sense. It's easier, I guess.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the podcast, BAYEM. And I'm so glad to have you on here. My first question, I'd love to get to know you a little bit more. Can you tell me a little bit about what your past views are in terms of spirituality, Christianity? I know a little bit of that is in there, but in terms of faith, where are you at?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jackson, thanks for having me on. So I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, still live here. Grew up in a semi-religious household, and the reason I say semi is because my mother's German, my dad's Black African American. He's from Indianapolis as well. So, my mother didn't really grow up too religious. So her views were always kind of like spirituality is important, but she didn't have like a connection to a certain like denomination. And then my dad grew up like, I wouldn't say super religious, but you know, my grandmother is or was for a long time a minister of music, so he was kind of always in the church. And then once we, were born, my siblings and I, uh, we started going to church with him all the time too. So pretty much every Sunday we were in church. I grew up in the Baptist denomination. So that's pretty much my background in religion. I mean, I went to church consistently, didn't miss a Sunday up until probably like, I'd say early high school. Gained enough autonomy where it was like, I kind of, I'm going to a friend's house from Saturday to Sunday, so I can't go this week. And then it eventually became a conversation, and I was like, yeah, I'd, rather kind of find my own path type of thing.
Yeah, I relate to a lot of your story there. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and then when I went to university, I started going to a Baptist church myself. And so I definitely can relate to a lot of that story, especially the musical side in church. I'm a drummer, and so I was growing up since I was the age of 13 until just a couple of years ago. I was regularly drumming in the church, and so I can definitely relate to that. And I find it so interesting too, like the idea of music and worship. It was actually my brother yesterday. He mentioned the distinct difference between worship and praise music, where worship music is meant to be kind of slower and cultivate maybe some sort of intimate kind of feeling or moment with God or with some higher power. And then praise is more of that kind of upbeat, like excited, expressing kind of joy of the Lord sort of thing. And so I just find that kind of whole concept of like religion and music, like how they're so intertwined in so many ways. It's so interesting. So I can you maybe speak to that a little bit? What was your experience in the Baptist church and with music? What was that like for you?
I mean, to be honest, that was kind of like if I had to, put together a ratio of what my focus in church was, I'd say it was probably like 99 1, or not 99 1, but I'd say like 95% music, 5% like everything else, because like I said, my grandmother was a minister of music. She plays the organ and she would also lead songs, singing as well as just directing. And then it's funny you say you're a drummer or grew up drumming. My dad's a drummer and then got me into
Nice.
drumming pretty early on as well. Um, I always wanted to drum in church. I have a lot of older cousins who are really good drummers, so I was kind of like, I wasn't getting that opportunity like that because this cousin's drumming at this place, this cousin's drumming at this place. Was fortunate enough to have the cousin who's like closest in age to me. If he needed to go like get something to drink or needed a break, he'd be like, "Hey, hop on." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in church. I'm playing the drums. That's crazy." But
Yeah.
the church that we grew up in, it was like a small church. I'm talking about like when the choir went up to sing, like the majority of the congregation was in the choir stand singing.
Oh,
Uh
wow.
and so my dad, he drummed there because one of his great uncles was like the choir director, and then when that great uncle moved on to like something else, they basically asked my dad to start directing the choir, bringing, some type of stability and infrastructure to it. With us being involved in music just growing up, my dad was like, "All right, yeah, logical next step is to have you guys sing in the church choir." So we started having to go to, Thursday night choir rehearsals, singing on Sundays. And I'm gonna be honest, like I didn't want to admit it at the time. My dad jokes about it now, but I used to lip sync. I used to lip sync really bad, man. Like
Oh,
I'm in the tenor section, so a lot of powerful voices, and I was not comfortable at all singing, man. Like not in the slightest. So I was just kind of happy to wear the robe, be up there, lead the choir out, and just be a part of the pageantry. But yeah, honestly, what kept me coming back to church, especially growing up, was, man, I want to hear what the visiting church has got when it comes to a drummer, a keys player, lead singers. Like the music was always what had me engaged. You know what I mean? So yeah, when it came to church, I always just think music first.
wow. That's so fascinating. And to think that you were, lip singing, you were kind of fake singing, and now you've made music your, craftsmanship. It's your career now. Where did that shift happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, life is funny that way, man. It's really funny. Honestly, I think where it shifted was like I'd always had an interest in writing music. I'd always like, you know, I had buddies of mine growing up, who had basements or garages where they had little setups. So we're, making rock music, writing acoustic songs. But when I got to the end of high school, I was like going into my second semester of my senior year. I had a lot of personal stuff happen. I was pretty much just like, yeah, I don't know if school is what I really want to do. I was kind of burnt out on the whole education thing. And so really out of the blue, a good friend of mine that I was making music with all the time was like, "Hey, there's this studio that is hiring. It's a studio called Stone Tree Studios, and you should put an application in." And it's funny. There was between music and sports, like I had always like kind of excelled in both of those things, but I wasn't really the type of person to put my name in the hat. It was kind of like I've definitely benefited off of having some really great people around me who kind of like pushed me to put my name in the hat. I put my name in the hat, and things kind of just work out. So I applied to the studio, kind of went up there, never showed them any of my own music, but was always kind of just, doing little knick-knack stuff while they were training me in like recording. And then there was a one time where that buddy and I literally I would just go to the first period of school so they would get my attendance down, and then I would just walk out of the school, basically skip for the rest of the day, and he'd pick me up because he was in like a GED program, so he could choose his hours. He'd pick me up, we'd go back to his house, right? And there was one time where like an R&B beat came on, and neither of us sang. He was more of a rapper, and I was at the time as well. But something about that beat kind of like connected with me, so we ended up passing on it. But like I took a picture of the little icon or whatever the title was, and went home, wrote a song to it, recorded it at his house, and yeah, he ended up like posting it on SoundCloud without me knowing. And I had a couple of people from school like, "Yo, man, that track is fire." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I know. They showed me the track. I'm like, "Man, this guy posted it." I got leaked before I even have any songs. He leaked it. So later that week, we're hanging out at the studio. We're like smoking with a buddy of ours in his car. And my friend was like, "Oh yeah, BAYEM sang on a song." I'm like, "Man, why is this man telling everybody?" So we played it. Our buddy was like, "Yo, we need to go inside and work on this." So worked on it, and that pretty much sparked us. We put together like a 14-song album in a month. I mean, we were skipping so much making music that it got to the point we were going to our government class that we shared. And if our government teacher didn't see us all week, when he finally saw us, he's like, "All right, what songs did you guys make? Like, show us some demos." You know what I mean? So
Wow.
yeah, after that, the guys who ran the studio were like, "Dude, you need to pursue this. I mean, we don't know where it's gonna go, but you you need to strike out on your own and try it out." And years later, we're here.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's so cool. It's amazing how it all just kind of works together. It wasn't obviously there's hard work involved, but there's also just so many like instances and like points in time where it was like, yeah, I didn't really do anything to make that happen, but there was just like my friend, he released it on SoundCloud,
Oh
and
yeah,
I met these people, or I started I was encouraged to apply at this one place, and it turned out to, you know, feed into further of your career. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing. Oftentimes I think people are always saying like to create your own future, work to create your own future. And I think there's wisdom in that to some extent. Like you want to work hard, but really it's taking advantage of where you're at, accepting like, oh, okay, so this is what's around me. This is what I can maybe work with, and just kind of seeing where it goes from there, you know? Um,
definitely. I think
yeah.
I think that's definitely where like faith comes in. I think a lot of times like there's a desire to try and control the outcomes, you know what I mean? And all the control is it's a fear response. One of my favorite quotes, I have like a quotes page in my phone, and one of my favorite quotes is, "When you finally relinquish control, you realize that you never had control, you just had anxiety." And I
Mm,
think that if there's like a thesis statement for my life up to this point, it's just been like just let go, you know what I mean? There's been so many one-off meetings, decisions of just like, you know what, I have no idea what's gonna happen, Imma just do it anyway. That has turned into something completely unimaginable in the positive, and if it wasn't positive, it was a great lesson. I internally laugh at the idea of trying to control things, you know what I mean? Because life is gonna do what it's gonna do. I think we're all called to do something. Whether we answer that call is up to us, but the call is still there, and, I think sometimes it's like there's a fear of, okay, I don't wanna jump because I don't know what's down there, but it's like, look, if you're being called to jump, then that means there's something down there for you, so just do it, you know?
yeah. And we talked before this, and you mentioned the idea of like acceptance, accepting maybe the outcomes of the decisions that you make. Um, and I find that to be a really important lesson, maybe in life. So, could you speak to that idea of acceptance? How can we just accept the things that we've done, the choices that we've made, and even when we are in a circumstance of trying to make a decision, how do we just make the decision and accept whatever is going to come our way?
When I think back on it, I feel like I was kind of, like, predisposed to, acceptance. I was predisposed to accepting circumstances because growing up, we didn't really have, like, money like that. When I was really young, we did, you know, my dad had he's an electrician, so he was making good money doing that, had properties, so there was a lot of money coming in. But then within, like, the same year, it was, like, 2005, the plant closed, moved away, and his we had some family members that were helping him with the real estate business, and that pretty much just evaporated. So pretty much you go from like full income to like no income, and it stayed like that for probably a decade. I mean, it was like ages 7 to 17. So there was a lot of stuff in between there that just like happened, financial hardships, emotional hardships that just happened. And so in a lot of ways, like there wasn't really ever a point in my life where I felt like, okay, I can just control things. I say this happens and it happens. It wasn't like oh, I asked for this for Christmas and it just shows up. There wasn't that. You know what I mean? Not
Mm,
saying we didn't get anything, but it was like I basically learned from a young age to temper expectations and just be grateful for what happens if it's above that expectation.
mm,
And so as an adult now, like when I think about acceptance, it's basically in line with sobriety. And I'm not talking about being, substance free. I'm just talking about, like, when I think of sobriety, I think about making decisions, understanding what the parameters are, understanding what you have around you. Because I think fear, ego, unrealistic expectations can basically cause us to be drunk in our decision making, and we can almost be so caught up in, okay, this is what it should be, and make a decision off of the should instead of the what is. The crazy thing is, I feel like even if you don't have the best keyboard, don't have the best computer, you can still, instead of being so focused on, okay, once I get to this point, I'll be ready to go jump into something. When you don't have a lot, you can basically accept it for what it is and just find workarounds. Okay, maybe you can't, put a bunch of tracks on this computer, but what you can do is become very creative in the way that you find solutions, and that'll help you once you get to that point. I think acceptance has helped me a lot too when it comes to just like general life feeling of contentment. Being so caught up in the way that things should be can detract a lot of happiness from the current moment. You know what I mean? It's like, look, this is a part of the story. This is just the chapter that I'm currently in. And me accepting that means that I'm getting information that I need for whatever's coming next. And I'm also just like finding the beauty in the little things. You know what I mean? So I think acceptance is so important in that it helps us live in the present. It helps us like take accurate stock of what we need to do to move forward and grow as people and spiritual individuals as well.
One thing you mentioned, which is kind of a good segment to some of the things I was wanting to cover in this, is the idea of sort of accepting your resources, what you currently have, and then finding solutions, using your creativity to find solutions to maybe limited resources, limited ability to do things. We tend to think of creativity when I say that. I think the first thing that comes to people's minds is artistic creativity. People think
Mhm.
of the painting, or they think of, for instance, music, or even YouTube and podcasting. Like this is a sense of artistic creativity, but in reality, creativity is much deeper than that. There's a lot more to it than just simply like the artistic side of creativity, but there's also things like the scientific creativity,
Mhm.
or what you just mentioned, which was what some philosophers would consider like everyday creativity, which is where you take advantage of what you have and find solutions to sort of get yourself to where you need to be. Um, Everyday creativity is really just about how can I be more efficient, and how can I accomplish the requirements and the things that I want to accomplish with what I have. Artistic creativity, it's all about emotion and sharing my experiences, my perspective, and music does a great job at that. Um, but anything that's artistic, that's what that's going to be. Then you
Mhm.
have the more scientific, which is like, why is the world the way it is? What are the ways that the world functions? How does this work? This and that. And that's more that kind of scientific, like trying to find the way things work and operate through the scientific method.
Definitely. When you were mentioning like taking what we have and doing what we need to do with it to like be able to sustain, be able to grow. There's a quote I heard from a like one of those like personal development YouTubers a while ago. It's focus on what you lack and you'll lose what you have. Focus on what you have and you'll gain what you lack. I think it's crazy how much like being in the present can solve a lot of just emotional distress issues and a lot of like turbulence that we may experience. 2 days from now isn't right now. Right now is right now. So that's really all that matters. Like me being present for this conversation, that's the only thing I'm focused on right now.
That's really good. That's super solid.
The future's speculative, and then the past is like inaccurate. You know what I mean? I forgot where I heard it from, but it's like every time you recall a memory, you're not recalling the original moment. You're recalling the last time that you recalled it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So if anything, the only thing that you can be sure actually is happening is the right now. Because shoot, I mean, how often do we have conversations with people who, maybe you experienced something with like 5, 6 years ago and everyone remembers the general details the same, or like the general concept the same, but then the details are like, you'll say, "Oh yeah, we did this," and the other person's like, "Nah, it went this way." So even that's like, unless you documented it, it's hard to even, you know, to even say whether or not it's real. And then I mean, shoot, even if you documented it, everyone's bias could say that something different happened, but that's, you know what I mean? That's neither here nor there.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, my my mind goes straight to the Gospels actually,
Mhm.
because I've done a decent amount of research into the Gospels, and one of the proof texts people put to the legitimacy of the Gospels as like historical text is the fact that the stories don't quite align.
Mhm.
They have certain elements and things that weren't quite exactly the same. And that sort of goes to its legitimacy because if the stories which are being presented of the past were exactly the same, word for word, detail by detail, right? If they were exactly the same, that would lean it to be less historical
Mhm.
because in reality, when we think about the past, when we write about the past, in this case, it's going to be different from person to person, from author to author, or even ask the same person to recount a story one day and then ask them to do it the next day, and they're going to include certain details and exclude other details. And it's so fascinating that we aren't, simply like machines that, store data, but instead we have experiences, emotions, perspectives on the things that we experience. And so, because of that, when we recall them, it's going to be different every single time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I mean too, like, even with a given memory, like, our attitude about it will change over time. When you experience something crazy with people that you, like, really care about, I mean, what's the one thing that everyone says? I mean, "We'll laugh about this later," you know what I mean? And you mentioned the Gospels. I think what's interesting is, like, I'm not a biblical scholar by any means, but I'll have these conversations with people in my life who are still heavily involved with the church. I think the thing that's interesting about them is, like, in some ways they're almost put together through a game of telephone, you know what I mean? You're taking a lot of secondhand accounts and almost like putting them on wax, you know what I mean? Putting them together to basically share a message, share an anecdote, basically take a metaphor and present it in a way that someone would be able to like consume it and take a life lesson from them. I remember a buddy of mine that I grew up with who, was pretty heavily involved in the church. He was a drummer at a church. One thing that he told me was like, if all the stories were exactly the same, word for word, that would actually be more suspicious than the current situation. Because that
Hmm.
would mean that there would almost have been like a unified decision that this is what the story is, you know what I mean? But the fact that they don't always line up, kind of lends to the legitimacy that this was a bunch of different people writing about their understanding of, you know, whoever it was, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think the telephone analogy is often brought up, and I don't want to like correct you by any means.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I think what you said is solid, but I think that is something that maybe is misunderstood
Hmm.
because a lot of these texts that we have to this day, they're put together by several different manuscripts. So it's not like one big, manuscript that is all going into like the translations, but it's like several different ones that we're kind of piecing together. So it's less like telephone and more kind of like all of these are happening fairly close to the events of it,
Mm,
and so we're simply more just kind of like translating it from the original to uh, the more modern day kind of languages.
okay.
Um,
It's almost like
I
archiving.
Yeah, almost archiving. I still think there's issues there. I'm not a Christian, and so I that's kind of the I used to be, but they that's kind of there's a lot to discuss with the manuscripts here, but
Mm.
um, I think it's an important thing because there are people that really care about this. And so I want to make sure that, I'm expressing it in the most powerful way possible, which is, yeah, it's not really quite telephone where it's like this person told this person who told this person who told this person, blah, blah, until we get to today. No, we have, ancient manuscripts that don't quite date all the way back to when we think the Gospels were written, but they do date back significantly close, very close in some cases, which isn't a gospel, but like in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, there's an early church creed there that Paul quotes. And we have very early documentation of this church creed to within like a decade of the death of Jesus, which is like, wow, that's crazy. And so kind of like we said, it's more we're taking these ancient sort of sources and then we're transcribing them rather than so and so told so and so told so and so until we get this more kind of oral version of it.
Yeah, and I meant no disrespect in saying it was telephone, just for the record, So yeah,
Oh yeah, no,
yeah.
dude, we use words. What do they mean? Like
Very true,
when
very
I
true. Hell yeah.
yeah. I wanted to talk about music since that's your specialty, and I have a couple quotes. I'm a bit of a nerd, and so one person that I find very inspirational is Dumbledore from Harry Potter.
Mhm.
And one thing he says about music, which I think is really enlightening, he says, "Ah, music," he said, wiping his eyes, "a magic beyond all that we do here at Hogwarts." When you first think of that, you're like, oh, that's interesting. But then you think a little bit deeper and you're like, what is so magical about music? Why does it create this like emotional response? People say, like, oh, I get goosebumps when I heard that melody, Like, why does that happen? Uh, why does us saying these words in a musical way versus just saying them, why does that make a difference? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I guess my question to you as a musician is, how do you view music? What what would you say you are doing when you produce music for people to listen to?
I'd say I'm channeling, honestly. I couldn't even really tell you where my head was. I mean, I could tell you roughly, but the act of writing it is one of those things where you almost yeah, I feel like it's the closest thing that I've like personally experienced on a consistent basis with like almost like spiritual ascension, if that's even the right term, you know what I mean? It's like there's just so much of it that is in a realm in a space that is just beyond the physical, beyond what I can even comprehend. I mean, that's my view on music creation. I think that's what makes the process so humbling is understanding that I'm just basically being used, you know what I mean? It's like I'm just a channel for this. I'm not even really the one that's just 100% responsible for making it happen.
Wow. Maybe this isn't the right term, but would you say that when you're creating music, you sort of have this light bulb moment when um what is out there sort of comes to your head, comes to your brain? Would you say that's like an experience that you actually have when recording or writing music?
Yeah, I'd say it's a light bulb moment. It's like a trance like state. Definitely. Definitely. I definitely call it that.
Yeah. And that to me is one of the best sort of curiosities in the world. As someone who has kind of looked into more of the materialistic world,
Mhm.
like, um, is the world like simply just all material? That right there is one of the most challenging things
Mhm.
to that worldview, which is like when you're creating something, when you sort of have a semblance of something come to you just in a moment, like just like that, Like where does that come from? What is that? Is that physical? How can we prove that that's physical? It's some sense of like consciousness, some sense of just connecting with something immaterial almost that already exists. Like you said, like music already exists before you wrote it.
Mhm.
You're just sort of being the vessel to write it, produce it, and put it out there. That's just wild to me. That's like, whoa. And it's very humble of you to recognize that and actually be honest and share that with other people too. Because I think it's real. I think I've experienced that. I think a lot of people have experienced that. And I think musicians in particular are people who have experienced that to a very extreme, extreme sense. There's also the idea of like a thought itself. Like, is a thought physical? Would you say that a thought is physical or immaterial?
I think it's physical for now, just because it's like, oh, all right, we can quantify that, based on brain scans. This is what when our brain shoots off these little things, this is what it means, or this is what it indicates. But I think that's just, you know, that's the best that we can do right now. I think what it actually is, what thoughts are is just, like I said, so far beyond that we I think we're just scratching the surface, which is wild because it feels like especially in the last 100, 150 years, 200 years, really, we've progressed so much as a society with all the technology that we've, been fortunate enough to stumble across, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
the fact that we're just scratching the surface makes me wonder what like the future is going to look like. I think about that all the time.
The reason I ask that is because there's like a thought experiment you can do to kind of show that thoughts are more than just physical. They're not just, brain, like electrical signals in your brain sort of
Hmm.
firing off in a specific way that creates a thought.
For
So
sure.
like if I were to ask you, think of a triangle, right? Close your eyes, you think of a triangle. You can picture a triangle in your head, right? A
Hmm.
picture of a triangle right there.
Hmm.
And if this is gonna be gruesome, but if I were to, open up your brain, cut open your brain, and try and find in there where that triangle is at, am I going to be able to pull out that image of a triangle like anywhere? No.
No. Yeah.
And so to me, it's like there's more. There's something more there that we don't know yet. And hopefully, like you said, we can find a solution, we can find an answer, and then maybe after that, it'll lead to more questions that we can keep sort of discovering and searching for. No.
Something I ask is like, why is that such a innate part of what it means to be a human? You know what I mean? Like creating and cultivating. Why is that's not just something that we all agreed to do, it's just something that is so deeply ingrained into what it means to be a human, you know? I mean, as far back as we can find. I mean, it feels like every day they're finding something new from further and further back in the past of like some cave painting or some little figurine. Like,
Mm.
what is it about? What is it about humans that just why do we just why have we always felt the desire to just take what's in our mind and like manifest it? It's an interesting question, something I think about a lot.
What would your answer to that question be if you could put one together?
When an idea has existed in my head, it's super speculative. When I finally put it down, whether it's in a song or conversation, whatever it is, it becomes concrete in a way.
Mm.
So I almost feel like I can understand it better when it's sitting right in front of me. So, I mean, that's just my own experience with it. So who knows? Maybe that's been the driving force for mankind is like, well, if it's in front of me, if it's tangible, if it's physical, then I can maybe understand my inner workings better by reflecting it on an external plane, you know?
Hmm. So, to maybe try and understand what you're saying a little bit more,
Hmm.
you would say that it's sort of the creativity is the expression of something internal that you sort of understand. Is that
Something that I'm
maybe?
seeking to understand. Like I may,
Oh,
because like, for example, you starting a podcast, I'm sure in your mind it existed as something, but now that it's actually like real and is continuing to become more and more real with every conversation and episode, I'm sure that, or I'd imagine your understanding of it is so much more concrete and thorough than it once was when it was just an idea in the brain. Like that's basically what I'm getting at. Is like by actualizing these things and putting them out, taking them from the internal and moving them to the external, we can almost like interact with them and develop a deeper understanding of something that was so speculative and almost mysterious when it was just existing in our brain.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I really like that idea because it's um, these concepts that kind of just float in the air. They're just around us. They come to our head. We picture them, and then we practice them, and we become a little bit more precise and clear on what they are
Mhm.
exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah. In expressing, we are seeking to find further understanding of what exactly we're expressing.
Exactly. But I
Yeah.
think at the basis of all creativity is a question. Um, what that question is varies. You know what I mean? I know for my own creativity, it's like, what can I do musically? Or even deeper than that is like, who will music help me become? You know,
Hmm.
who will like, what will music help me understand about my own life, my own place in the world? I think at the basis of all creativity, cultivation, you're just asking a question and then just going through the process of pulling the internal, putting it out externally, and just finding tiny pieces to that answer as time goes on. I feel like when you go through that process, you're basically getting closer to whatever this whole thing actually is for, what the earth is for, why we're here. And even if you're still super far off, it's like, you know, you've done enough in your pursuit that whoever comes after you doesn't have to start at zero. They can start from where you were and just kind of move forward. We're basically playing a billion year relay race. It's just cool to be a part of it though, you know what I mean? To be able to contribute in some type of way to just even if it's that much, it's like, well, we're that much farther, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if it fills you with a it's like sense of like pride and meaning and purpose, because you're like, yeah, I'm a part of this process. I'm a part of this, with your analogy, this relay race of life, of just, figuring it out. And there's something very beautiful in that. So, um, you say that you're spiritual. How would you maybe define your spirituality?
I respect my place in this whole thing. I'm a piece. Since I'm a piece, I need to make peace like decisions, basically looking out for everyone else around me, spreading kindness, being enthusiastic to see people, trying to learn as much as I can, understanding that there is a limit to what I will understand. Basically, right sizeness. Uh, if I had to put my belief system down, that would be the main point. Is just stay right sized. Understand that I'm a limited being, but there's parts of me that are unlimited, like we talked about when it comes to like thoughts and expression. But all in all, I'd say that's where like my spirituality basically is anchored is in making sure that I'm always like right sized.
I guess, how would you define right sized? What do you mean by that?
I believe in a higher power, maybe not a denominational one, but definitely one that's been informed by my upbringing in like the Baptist church, but also informed by a lot of different conversations I've had with people, not even necessarily about spirituality, but just about life. I mean,
Mm.
obviously life and spirituality like intertwine a lot. So right sizeness is understanding what my strengths are, understanding where I can contribute, but also understanding that my whole purpose for being here is to continually learn and continually grow. Be proud of what you've done so far, be proud of who you are, but don't let that pride turn into a fuel for an ego saying that you don't have to learn anymore. It's like, no, this is awesome that you're here, but
Mm.
you're here because of this very important piece, which is growth, which is learning, which is trying to try new things and basically continue to push the envelope and become a more whole person.
There's a picture that kind of came to my head
Mm-hmm.
when you were describing right sizeness, and the picture is like when we look at ourselves compared to the size of the universe, right? Galaxies and galaxies, and how large the universe is. We appear immonstrably small.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't even quantify how small we are
Mm-hmm.
in comparison to the size of the universe. Like it's just insane how small we are.
Mm-hmm.
However, at the same time, we can go the other direction. We can go down to the molecular level, increasingly, zoom in and go further and further and further and further and further in. And from that perspective, we're immonstrably large. We're ginormous.
Mm-hmm.
And so right sizeness might be the realization of both, that we are not puny, worthless beings. We're also not ginormous, the most important and center of the universe beings.
Mm-hmm.
We're just here, existing.
Yeah, I mean that hits it right. That hits the nail right on the head. And honestly, I mean, I'm probably gonna use that as the way to describe it because I feel like that's the perfect visual. You know what I mean? I think you know if we take nihilism for example,
Mm.
it leans pretty heavily towards the universe is so big and we're you know we're not really worth anything. Well, that's not fair. That's not fair to your value as a human being to think that way. But it also isn't fair to other human beings and even the earth to operate with the belief that we're the biggest thing walking. So yeah, I'd say I mean you hit the nail right on the head.
In terms of your spirituality,
Mhm.
do you have any like practices or I guess things that you do that kind of cultivate that spirituality?
Yeah, so I'm a part of a 12-step group. Joined it like 3 years ago now. It's called Broken to Blessing, and it's not based around, like substance abuse or anything, although we have people in the group who have dealt with some substance abuse. Um, it's basically built off of this idea that we're all broken in some way, and through fellowship with other human beings and like bringing up topics and talking about them, we can become more at one with that and also acknowledge how that brokenness can help us become a blessing to other people. That's why the whole idea of broken to blessing is like caterpillar to butterfly. That's like the imagery. And so I go to 2 meetings a week. I have a sponsor that I become very close with, and so uh going to those meetings and having conversations with my sponsor, it provides so much in terms of like grounding, because I think sometimes even when things are going really well, when it feels like, wow, I'm super connected to my uh higher power, um having those meetings helps like ground everything. It's the same with the opposite when things aren't just when things seem like nothing's going right, I can't make a right move. Having those meetings and speaking with other people about the fact that all of these, even though they may not be going through the exact same situation at the same time, that there's nothing new under the sun and that all of these things are universal, it creates such a feeling of like oneness. And I find that my mood and my outlook changes even slightly if I don't go to a meeting, because there's something about that fellowship aspect. Because even though I don't go to church anymore, um, one thing that I did really enjoy and found a lot of value in, not just in church, but even like in growing up playing sports and everything, is just being around like minds, being around people who are all kind of striving for the same thing. I think those situations have put me super close to my spirituality, understanding that there is a greater purpose for what I'm doing. And yeah, that's pretty much how I like cultivate my spirituality now, is by going to those meetings and, you know, not just hearing other people's stories, but also sharing my own and even, doing service projects and just trying to continue that balance of like receiving and giving. That's where my spirituality is right now, like how that's cultivated.
So you mentioned at the end there, you mentioned the both giving to, I would assume, like other people in need, and
Hmm.
then receiving at the same time from other people. You also mentioned community.
Mm-hmm.
as a very important piece of your spirituality. And I think those are like two pieces that are very consistent from one worldview to the next.
Mm-hmm.
And when people are trying to cultivate this concept of spirituality, those are always there. In Proverbs, it mentions iron sharpening iron.
Mm-hmm.
It's very often quoted proverb. One brother, one sister, one person in your life shaping and improving you as a
Mm-hmm.
person. Um, and so that's where that community element comes in. And it's very essential to pretty well any religious belief that we find in the world. You might avoid the word religion, but in a sense, it is. It's a religion. It's a worldview. It's a perspective of creating and cultivating right sizeness. I'd like to ask you this because you would define yourself as not religious, like at least religiously affiliated with any sort of formal religion.
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct?
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would also find myself in that sort of state of being as well. But there was a quote that from C.S. Lewis, I believe, that talked about how it's better to choose a established religion than to sort of express spirituality that doesn't have any real hard definitions to it. When you think of like a map, right? It's very defined. Every single sort of divot within the land, separating it from the water, all the rivers, even the road system that we've built is all in the map. You can look at like Google Maps and scroll out all the way to the world. You can even zoom in as much as you want
Mm-hmm.
to see like a small town and all the roads that make up that small town, and buildings and shops. And so we use that to sort of guide ourselves and construct a way of getting from one place to the other. And so religion's like a map, but a map of how to live. And just like any other map, we want to follow what other people have found to be true rather than trying to find truth all from within ourselves. And so his argument for why you should associate yourself with a religion, established religion, rather than sort of live out your own spirituality and try to define that yourself, is because it's not well defined. You may understand your street, your neighborhood, but you don't understand the streets of New York or the lands within Zimbabwe. You don't understand that side of the world. And so, in terms of religion and spirituality, you should establish yourself with one that's already been established by several people thinking, experiencing, and living life from different perspectives and times. Do you want to trust your own sort of scribbled together kind of map of your neighborhood, or would you rather trust the global map that has been created by several people across several generations?
Honestly, I think the whole point is very valid. I mean, I think he makes a very valid point. Um, yeah, I'm really just sitting here processing that, honestly, because I had never even really thought about it in those terms. I mean, it makes total sense. I mean, yeah, the logic is sound. Wow. Yeah. I'm honestly stumped. I really am. Like, because the entire time you were explaining that, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, that is totally sound logic, tried and true. I mean, it makes total sense. It's like, would you rather go with the tried and true, where there's been many people who put this together, asked a lot of the major questions, and have pretty much put it in a box, like, hey, if you need it, it's here for you. Wow, yeah, I'm gonna be thinking about that for a while. I'm gonna be thinking about that for a while. That really, wow,
Yeah.
that's one of
I
those.
I I just want to say I love your humility in just recognizing that too, because that was kind of my reaction at first too. I was like, oh my goodness, like what? Uh, I guess I gotta choose something. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. So, but I mean, at the same time, there's also value in discovering things yourself. I know that to be true
Hmm.
from my own experience, and also from viewing other people and how they have discovered things. There was a period of time where I was teaching in schools, and the best way to get a student to understand a concept is to kind of propose different questions and ways of thinking about a topic until they discover it themselves. And then they learn it even better when you ask them to then show their neighbor
Mm-hmm.
that concept, because then they have to teach it too. And so, in the same way, I think religion's that way too. Like, there is maybe value in sort of accepting the big map that several people or across several generations have created, but there's also a sense of value in discovering things for yourself too. Maybe the answer is to do both, to
Mm-hmm.
sort of live life according to one way of living, but continue to ask those sort of um, probing questions, and in order to maybe find a refined version of what's already out there, to be a part of writing and maybe detailing the map a little bit more.
Because I'd imagine too, going through the process of like, okay, I'm trying to figure out what I believe. I'd imagine once there's that point where it's like, okay, this is the denomination I want to be a part of. This is the overarching religion I want to be a part of. I'd imagine that the faith and resolve in that doctrine would be so much more steadfast because you went through the process of asking those deeper questions and have aligned yourself with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think an important piece of it too is you have to ask those questions outside of the pre assumed perspective itself. I've researched a lot of things from the Christian perspective and found some sense of like, yeah, I'm right. What I've grown up to believe is right. And in sort of stepping back and being able to ask the questions outside of a Christian perspective, I think you'll find more satisfactory answers, so that if I were to, step back into Christianity or Islam, or um I've met some lovely people who are LDS, Latter-day Saints.
Mm-hmm.
You have to step back out of those sort of preconceived notions, ask those questions, and take on different perspectives on how they answer those questions to actually, I think, find something satisfactory.
It sounds like at the core of all of it is just openness,
Hmm.
just being open to ask those questions, open to challenging our own beliefs, open to the possibility that maybe there's something else out there that fits a little bit better or helps us draw the conclusions that make sense for our day-to-day life.
Beautiful. That was amazing. Openness.
Open.
That's the word. It's the word of the day.
I think one of the most beautiful things ever is when someone asks you a question and you just don't have an answer for it, because that means
Hmm.
it's something you never thought about before. And if you did, maybe you didn't think about it that deep. And there's been a couple of questions so far that I'm like, you know what? I know we're recording this right now, but let me get back to you in like 30 business days and try to come up with a more formulated thought. I feel like this has been a great like, yeah, just an exercise in trying to vocalize my own belief system. So
Yeah.
I've tried to do the best
Well,
I can. If it made
well,
sense, it made sense. But if it didn't, just letting y'all know that's where it is. That's where it was.
well, maybe that's reason for you to come back on the podcast.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Do a little sequel, and then you can share some of your findings, and yeah,
yeah.
that'd be fun.
It's like update everyone. This is what my belief system is now. I have it written down on a scroll with like a feather pen or whatever they used to call them, a quill. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to use a quill. It's
Oh,
the only way. In Old English too, you know.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. A lot of
Uh,
ye's in there.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to get into some of your music.
Right.
Um, honestly, I uh, before we kind of got in contact, I hadn't heard too much of your music before. And so kind of preparing for this, it was really great to dive into it and see which songs maybe hit me in a specific way. I was like, oh, that's super good. So the first song I kind of wanted to dive into. it's the number one on Spotify for you in one of your more recent songs, Wrecked. Um, and so I guess my first question is, what inspired you to create that song?
Yeah, so that was one basically late last year being 2024. If someone's watching this in the future, it's beginning of 2025. Things started to come together for us to put like a little EP together, like a short project. And it wasn't something that was like planned at the beginning of the year or even in the middle of the year. Kind of came together. As things were coming together, I was sitting in the studio and I just basically was writing about where I was in my life at the time. I'm in a relationship. Started dating my girlfriend early of last year. We talk about all the time. The exact date is pretty like, well, was it this day? Was it this day? Because we kind of just like talked for a while, got to know each other, and then like decided, yeah, let's be serious. I think between music and love, a lot of times I found in myself, okay, I'm wishing for this thing, I'm wishing for this thing, I'm wishing for this thing. And then when it's finally sitting in front of you, it's almost like, wait a minute, I'm not ready yet. Hey, this is my first time really feeling this way. This is my first time really feeling so out in the open, so vulnerable. And, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with my girlfriend since then. And it's funny that, you know, in a lot of ways we're on the same page. It's like, what's scary about it wasn't, oh, could this go wrong? What was scary was like, wow, this could really be it. You know, this could really be like that person that I'm supposed to be with. And just the idea of that was like, whoa, that's terrifying. So I just decided to write my thoughts on that, you know, just being honest about, this is all new. This is uncharted territory for me, but if you can lead me through it, or if we can lead each other through it, that's just where I'm at.
Wow, that's so cool because that's your story, you know. And what's really cool about that is also the fact that when I was listening to it, I was, you know, not getting that perspective, but I was getting another way of thinking about it. I think it was Brandon Sanderson. He's an author.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things he mentions is like when he writes a story, he'll write a story and ask people what they understood from it. And when they say that, it's revealing what's inside of them, what's vulnerable, what's actually happening underneath, under the skin for them, you know? And it just totally changes from person to person, people's interpretation.
I appreciate you listening, by the way. That really means a lot.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I think your music's super great. The next one that I have that I thought was really interesting was the song Weakness. And I think the reason it stuck out to me was because it kind of gave me Imagine Dragon vibes to it. Maybe that's I don't want to inflate your pride, but you do a good job. And
right on.
The fact that it was giving me Imagine Dragon vibes, one of my favorite bands, is a huge compliment. So the lyrics that I kind of wrote down. Actually, you know what? Why don't I play these songs?
Oh,
I don't have to read out the lyrics. But yeah, here we go. Where do we even start? The backseat of my car. But in a while, it's like the spark. Come play me, enslave me. Where do we even go? Do I really wanna know? You're toxic with the way you love. I've lost it. Why do you break me down into tinier pieces? Said you were in love and I did believe it. Now I know that you're my only weakness. Weakness, my weakness. Yeah, there it is. That's just a piece of it. Go listen to it on Spotify or wherever you listen to music. Shameless plug for you, but
I know. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I guess where were you at? That was kind of my initial interpretation was, oh man, this is giving me, Imagine Dragon vibes. Um, and then also the idea of kind of struggling in relationship and how relationships, reveal your own weakness. That was my interpretation of it. But how was it when you were writing that song? What was going through your perspective?
Honestly, your interpretation pretty much aligns with what I was trying to get across, like when writing. At that point in time, I was still like boundaries were something that were like difficult for me. You know what I mean? So I would find myself in a lot of um like relationship situations where they were more turbulent than they needed to be. You know what I mean? 9 times out of 10, I was not compatible with the person, but because I was like not at a place where I was comfortable setting boundaries, uh, the relationship went on anyway. Neither of us were bad people. It was just, for one reason or another, just we missed each other a lot. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah, I'd say your interpretation was pretty in line with what I was trying to get across. And it's always wild listening to older songs. I mean, that song is like a little under 2 years old now. It's always interesting listening to older tracks just because I just immediately think about not just the process of making it, but just what life looked like at the time, like the job I was working or like who I was hanging around. So
Mm.
yeah, thanks for that little glimpse into the past, the not
A
too
little
distant
touch of
past.
nostalgia.
For sure,
Yeah.
for sure.
I guess I have one more song that I thought was pretty relatable, at least in terms of the way I was interpreting it. But it's your song "Pressure"
Mm.
in the Afterglow album, I believe.
Yeah.
I feel complete, thinking back to when things were simple. I'm moving on, but now I'm stuck somewhere in the middle. I changed up a little, got pushed down a little. I stayed up alone, but now it's alright. I walked down the road, I cried in the cold. I survived it all, it was all in due time. Pressure, I'm not the same. Oh, pressure, oh, pressure, oh, pressure, pressure.
There's a tease. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that song too. Stuck out to me. But can you maybe explain where were you at when writing that song and maybe some of the purpose behind that song as well?
Yeah, so that was actually the first song that I had the privilege of releasing under the label that I've been working with since then. That was back in 2020. I believe we released in like August. Um, yeah, I was 21. I had made the decision 4 years prior, that I was gonna pursue music. And when that song was being written, there were so many like things that were just changing in my life. I was going from making music independently and kind of just pursuing this pipe dream. You know what I mean? I had in my mind decided, this is gonna happen. I don't know how it's gonna happen, but the logistics of that happening were just so far beyond. I was basically, I wouldn't say grasping at straws, but kind of just putting it together the best way that I could. But one conversation led to another. A good friend of mine at the time introduced me to the guys that run this label, and within a couple of months, it went from, okay, this is something that I'm like pursuing, to something that has become very real, and now we're talking about paperwork and signing and a company investing in like my creativity basically. And so that song was basically put together kind of just thinking about all of those factors, because I remember when I first started making music as a kid, it was really just kind of a thing that I did, just same as playing video games, skateboarding, shooting baskets outside. I mean, it was just something you did. And I think at the time I didn't truly appreciate just the lack of, trying to find a word that's not pressure, but lack of pressure that came with that, you know what I mean? It was just something I did. It was something I enjoyed. And so, yeah, that song was basically trying to encapsulate that feeling of, hey, this is all very new. But all of my life experiences up to this point have kind of put me here. So yeah, I think back on that song and really other songs, including Weakness, including Wreck, and I feel like they're all just little snapshots of where my head was at that moment. Because I've always felt like music has helped put my emotions in the most concise and understandable package for other people to like hear where I'm coming from. Because me explaining how I feel or what I think is something that I'm still working on, you know what I mean? I feel like I've gotten a lot better as I've gotten older and just had more conversations. But yeah, when I think about pressure in particular, that's what I first think of.
Yeah, I can relate to that, that's kind of the point in life where I'm at right now, where I'm, figuring this whole podcast thing out, and I'm, figuring out how to be asking these questions. It's definitely a lot, and it's encouraging to hear your other side of it, sort of. You said earlier, as you express yourself, as you take it from a concept to reality, it becomes more defined and it becomes more understandable. Where can people find you, find out more about you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram, any social platform, X, Twitter, whatever you call it. If you look up BAYEM online, all my links come up. I primarily use Instagram to like interact with people, but I can be reached pretty much everywhere. On all streaming platforms, it's the same thing. It's just my name, BAYEM. You can do all caps, all lowercase. It should come up.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with musician, songwriter, and deep thinker, BAYEM. Be sure to check him out on social media and wherever you listen to music. I would like to end things off with a quote from Albert Einstein, of all people. If I were not a physicist, I would probably be a musician. I often think in music. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music. Very inspirational. Thank you, Albert. But anyway, thank you guys for tuning in and listening to this episode. You are amazing rock stars. Go, stay curious, and be blessed.